This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised. Okay. Hi, Death by Southwest listeners. It is Margot here, and it is Tuesday afternoon. We are going to do a true crime episode. So welcome. I hope everyone is having a lovely Tuesday. You know what? I just breathed in and realized I need to use my inhaler. So we're going to have to pause for 1 second. Please hold. Okay. I don't know about anybody else or anybody who has asthma, but the winter is the worst time for my asthma. I mean, it's never a great time to have asthma, I feel like, but and winter in Arizona is obviously much more mild than other places, but it's cold. It gets really cold here at night, and then it's beautiful during the day. So it's like, you know, freezing and the heat's blasting, and then I'm sorry, I'm trying to fix my computer and it is not working. I can't do it and podcast at the same time. So give me a second. I'm trying to raise the computer stand that it's on. Okay, I can't raise the computer stand and think at the same time, obviously. Okay. Better. It's freezing cold at night. And so I have my heat blasting. Like right now I have a radiator right next to me to keep me warm. And it's only 4 o'clock, but this house gets really cold. Nobody cares, do they? I know this is not a great start, but we're gonna jump in. I read, so I guess what the bonus was yesterday. Yeah. God, that was just yesterday. It feels like such a long time ago. But I uploaded the bonus, the video to Spotify, so you can watch it right in Spotify. And I noticed I don't use Spotify that much. I use it for music, um, but never really podcasts. I, for whatever reason, listen to podcasts on Apple Podcasts. And so I noticed yesterday that Spotify, since the last time I have looked at podcasts on there, they've started doing comments. Like you can comment on an episode. So, Apple has Apple reviews. Sorry, the cat is rubbing his head up against the computer, which is shaking it. But Spotify has now comments that people can leave, and man, people are wonderful, and people are harsh. I don't know why I thought it would be any different than Apple reviews. I mean, some of the Apple reviews are absolutely horrible, but yeah, I hadn't seen any of the comments. So getting all of the comments at once yesterday, cat, get out of here. Jeez. Um, it was just like one of them was like, do these girls know how stupid they fucking are? And I was like, wow. I understand that sometimes, look, podcasting is I guess some people do it. They go to a studio, they are preparing all day, there's no distractions. I'm not. I'm in my home. I have 3 animals. Before, when we used to do this, obviously Jenna was here, Mark was living here for a while. There's distractions. I mean, it's life. It's I'm not gonna, the cat is rubbing up against my computer. I have to stop and use my inhaler. Things happen. And to me, I guess some people want a very, very, very polished podcast. And I understand that because I like those too. But I also like something that's a little bit more a slice of real life. Okay. I'm warmed up now. Here we are. Here we go. Anyways, I have no idea if leaving comments on episodes in Spotify helps or doesn't help the podcast, but I always enjoy reading comments, even the mean ones. So thank you for everyone who in the past year or so has left comments on Spotify. I'd love to know if anybody actually watched the video episode in Spot, or if you listen on Spotify regularly, was it weird that there's also a video there now, or does it not matter? And yeah, that's about it. Uh, should we just jump in? I guess we should. I won't blab too much because, as always, that was a lot of the comments. But you know what? One of my favorite things, and this sticks in my mind, as much as the bad comments stick in my mind, so do the good. And, so many of our reviews on Apple and so many of the comments on Spotify and everywhere are like, too much talking, too much blabbing, too much chit chat, not enough story, which are all very, very valid and fair comments. And then somebody had left a comment, a review, something that said, I don't really understand all these comments about how there's too much talking. This is a podcast. That's the point. And I can make the distinction between talking, like sharing the story, or talking like I just did for the past 3 or 4 minutes, whatever. Um, and people don't want that. They just want to hear like the intro music and like we are in the story. So we're going to do that right now. We are getting to the story. Today, I have a story. And if anyone has a better word that I could, a case. I'm sure I've debated this openly before, but a story, a case, a story feels like this is someone's life and death that we're talking about. A story makes me think of like John Grisham or Cinderella, and this is not that. So send your suggestions for what else I could say. A case. Today we have a case that takes place in both New Mexico and Arizona, but mostly the kind of basis for it is in a place called Farmington, New Mexico. Farmington, New Mexico is situated in the northwest corner of New Mexico. It's very close to the Four Corners Monument, which is where New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado all meet. And you can actually go there and stand like with your, 1 foot in Arizona and 1 foot in Utah. And I have done that once. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's not that cool. um, The Farmington has around 45,000 people for the population, um, surrounded by Navajo Nation, as well as the Ute and Jicarilla Apache tribal lands. Not sure that was pronounced correctly, but go with me here. So there's a really big Native American cultural influence in Farmington. There's a lot of outdoor activities in Farmington, as with a lot of southwestern states: hiking, fishing, natural attractions like various wilderness parks and historical parks. The San Juan River is right there, which is renowned for fly fishing. And let's see what else. Approximately 5,400 feet of elevation, and hot summers, cold winters, low humidity. And Farmington also has, and this is relevant to our story, has a notable Mennonite presence. Now, I don't know if anybody has heard that word before. I've heard it. Here's where these comments about us being really stupid probably come in, because I'm just going to be brutally honest. I heard Mennonite and I thought of like a rock or a gem. You know what I mean? Like rose quartz, or I can't think of them because I'm not into like crystals and gems and stuff. I mean, they're lovely, but I'm not a collector of that. Um, so I can't think of amber. Is that like one, or turquoise? You know, gems and rocks. I guess that's pretty self-explanatory. I don't have to keep saying that. But that's what I thought about. Now, I actually didn't look up if Mennonite has another, like maybe there is a crystal or a rock called Mennonite. I didn't look that up, but that is not what is being referred to here. Um, Mennonite in our story is referring to a group of Christian denominations that arose from the Anabaptist movement during the Protestant Reformation in Europe back in the 1500s. The name comes from Menno Simons, a Dutch priest who helped to organize and formalize the beliefs. So, and forgive me, I am not a religious person and I am not knowledgeable about various religions. So just be patient with me. So Anabaptism, I'd never heard of that word. These are some key things that make Mennonites distinct. Anabaptism, a core belief that baptism should only happen when a person is old enough to understand and confess their faith. Hence Anabaptism, which means rebaptizer. So instead of being baptized as an infant, you're baptized, I believe, when you're 18, if you're a Mennonite. Mennonites are known as one of the historic peace churches. They're committed to pacifism and often refuse to participate in military service. Many Mennonites value a simple life with an emphasis on community and mutual aid. A lot of groups are known for their plain dress code and limited use of technology, although this varies widely in the modern world. And they have a strong tradition of service to others, both within the community and around the world. So, which kind of reminds me of, God, why is the word pilgrimage coming to mind? I know that with Mormons, they do, and the word is escaping me. I think with Mennonites, it's called like your ministry. Um, you know, Mormons go away to another country and help build homes and and there's a word that is on the tip of my tongue and I've lost it. But a simple analogy for Mennonites is imagine a group of Christians who really take Jesus's teachings about peace and love to heart. They strive to live simply, help others, and avoid violence. That's kind of like the basic. I don't think that's actually an analogy. Thanks, Chat GPT, for making me sound stupider. Um, so that's not an analogy, but that is the kind of basis for Mennonites. It's a form of Christianity. Uh, ChatGPT also told me that it is important to remember that there is a wide diversity of beliefs and practices among Mennonites today. Some groups are very traditional, while others are more modern, but they all share a common history and a commitment to following Jesus in their daily lives. So that will come into play today with several of the people in our story. I can't help it. It just comes out. Story just is easier to say. So our case today focuses on Sasha Krause, who was 27 years old at the time that this story takes place in 2020. She grew up in Texas, one of 6 siblings. She was described as a good sister, very conscientious. Yep, that's right. Eager to read at a young age, a very determined little girl. She had a real sense of confidence, and her sisters said that sometimes this confidence came across as bossiness. She was raised, this confused me, so I'm just flagging it, because she was raised in a Mennonite community, but she was not born into the faith. And her family, I believe, was part of the Mennonite community. I mean, they are. Um, so reading that, in my research that she was not born into the faith is confusing to me, because if she's born into a family that considers themselves a Mennonite family and part of the Mennonite church and community, how was she not born into the faith? I guess that the best that I can understand is that leads back to like the baptism stuff. And sorry, I'm not meaning to minimize this by saying like baptism stuff, but she chose to join the Mennonite church when she was a young adult. She was about 11 or 12, and she chose to become part of the community and go through the baptism. So something just moved next to me, and I thought it was a spider on the desk, which would have ended this recording really quickly. It was not. Okay. So She had a very strong faith because she chose to become part of the community when she was 11 years old, which speaks to her strong faith and commitment. Um, she later formally became a member of the church, which is a process where you do some discernment. You commit to following Jesus Christ. There's a few other steps involved in that I'm not going to get into. So in Grandview, Texas, where she was living, she became a school teacher and worked there for a number of years. Apparently, she had a disagreement with another teacher, which kind of led to her moving and leaving that job and that school. I believe that it was a school within the Mennonite community. So she just, because it said that led to her post at the Mennonite community outside Farmington, New Mexico. And I read that several times, it being referred to like as your post. You're posted in a certain place where you're contributing to the Mennonite community. Wow. Okay. So she left Grandview, Texas. She took up a new post at the Mennonite community outside of Farmington, New Mexico, where she got a job at a publishing ministry called Lamp and Light Publishers. I just realized that I skipped over a few little things about the Mennonites in Farmington. So there's a notable Mennonite presence, although the community is actually kind of small compared to the general population there. But there are a few businesses, which Lamp and Light Publishing is one of. So that's where Sasha worked. It's one of the most recognized Mennonite ministries in Farmington. It serves as a hub for publishing and distributing religious materials, and it is very closely associated with the Mennonite Church. And that's it. That's all we really need to know about that. But the Lamp and Light Publishing reminded me that that's one of the bigger Mennonite businesses in Farmington. So this was around 2018 that Sasha moved to Farmington, got a job at Lamp and Light Publishers. She became very involved in the Mennonite community in Farmington. She was actually part of a group of conservative Mennonites, which is a weird thing to me because to me they all seem conservative, but there's an even more conservative kind of sect of Mennonites where women wear head coverings and long dresses or skirts. Men wear very plain clothing. They all practice non-resistance and they have a very, very deep belief in forgiveness, which I like that. I think forgiveness is important. Sasha also taught Sunday school. She was well known in the community for her kindness, her compassion. Her father had once described her as being very friendly and deeply compassionate with zero ability to hide stress or emotion. And I read that and I was like, Sasha, I relate. I cannot hide an emotion to save my life, even when I really want to. She was also a writer and a poet. Some of her writings were even turned into hymns that were sang at church. Sasha also spoke fluent Spanish, and she was learning French to help with her ministry. A reporter who was very interested in this case and did a lot of reporting on this case was quoted as saying, some family friends that I've talked to have said that Sasha did things to make sure people who did not understand English could understand the church services, sitting next to them and simultaneously translating the church services into Spanish for them. So she was just a very helpful, kind woman. And on the evening of January 18th, 2020, Sasha, at this point in our story, is 27 years old, and she is having dinner with her roommates at their home in Farmington. After dinner, she said that she needed to run an errand for her upcoming Sunday school lesson. So she got in her silver Ford Focus and she drove over to the church to pick up some materials for Sunday school. She parked right next to the sidewalk and went inside the church. We are assuming there's no CCTV of this. There's nobody who necessarily saw her do this, but this is what we can gather from the fact that her car was parked there. Uh, no one knows when she came out of the church, where she went, or what exactly happened because Sasha was never seen again after this. A coworker of Sasha's was quoted as saying she drove a few hundred yards from her home to the church, so obviously she lived very close, to pick up Sunday school books. And about 1:30 the next morning, one of her coworkers here realized that Sasha had not returned. So again, this statement is a little odd to me. It didn't seem to be worth digging into that much more. But 1:30 the next morning, her coworkers, she's not at the publishing house at 1:30 in the morning. So maybe it was a misprint and it meant 1:30. Either way, by the next day, her roommates and coworkers realized that she had never come home. No one knew where she was, and she was reported missing. And what makes this very sad, this is very sad, so this doesn't make it more sad, but 3 weeks before her disappearance, so for the holidays, Sasha was in Grandview, Texas with her family. And apparently her family didn't really like taking photos together. But for some reason, this particular holiday, Sasha's father, Robert, he just said, I just had this feeling that we might not all be together for a while. So I want to take some family photos. So the whole family, again, a big family, gathered in front of this kind of display cabinet where they had like dishes displayed and took a ton of serious photos, silly family pictures. They were just having a really good time together and wanted to kind of commemorate this particular holiday season. And after Sasha was there for the holidays, the night she was leaving, it was dark. She pulled out of the driveway to begin the 14-hour drive back to Farmington. And she actually accidentally clipped a pickup truck and knocked, I don't know why I said that so funny, sorry, a pickup truck, and knocked off her passenger side mirror, which made her family even more concerned. Her family was, they were a close family, and a 14-hour drive is a long drive, especially to make by yourself. So her family was a bit concerned about her making the trek alone, but she made it just fine. She made it safely home, only to sadly disappear 3 weeks later. Early on in this investigation, authorities openly acknowledged that this is going to be extremely challenging because they couldn't confirm if maybe she had willingly left, maybe she was frustrated with the church, maybe she didn't like living in Farmington, maybe she wanted to get back home, but something happened. Obviously tons and tons of questions in the initial days of the investigation. But it was impossible for them to say whether she had left on her own or whether she had been abducted, because her car was still parked at the church. Her wallet was at her home, so unlikely that there was some type of robbery. And there was seemingly no other evidence. Car was there, nothing suspicious about it, nothing suspicious at her home. She just kind of vanished. Police called this disappearance, unsurprisingly, very suspicious. And the investigation went on for weeks, but they had very little to go on. So, of course, search parties and attempting to obtain and look through her phone records, any internet history. But again, due to being a Mennonite and being a pretty, what was the word that I used? I can't remember the word now, but conservative, a pretty conservative Mennonite. She didn't like use her phone or technology the same way that the rest of us do, is what I'm gathering. So the investigation really never went anywhere. Her whole family was in Texas. Her friends had, nothing, there was nothing out of the ordinary that day, or her behavior was normal lately. There was very little for police to go on. And about 5 weeks after her disappearance on February 21st, there was a woman who was camping in a forest clearing. She was gathering firewood to camp. right outside of Flagstaff, Arizona, near the Sunset Crater Volcano National Park, when she made a very gruesome discovery. She noticed she's, walking around looking for firewood, and she noticed something white on the ground, which really stood out because there was a lot of black volcanic cinders and dry pine needles. I lived in Flagstaff. Black volcanic cinders don't ring a bell to me, and I lived there for years. Dry pine needles, yes, there's pine trees everywhere, but that's really neither here nor there. Basically, something stood out to her amongst the brush on the ground, and she became very disturbed and distraught. She drove to a nearby visitor center and told the staff that while she was collecting firewood, she had seen legs and shoes on the ground. She thought it was a body. She wasn't sure. Police arrived and they discovered a woman lying face down under some brush. She was cold, long dead. She had a gunshot wound to the back of her head. She was dressed in a gray dress, a white coat, and hiking shoes. Her hair was pinned back in a bun. Her hands were bound with duct tape, and her underwear was missing. So she had no underwear on. So the San Juan County Sheriff's Office, which is the sheriff's office in Farmington, was contacted by the Coconino County Sheriff's Office in Flagstaff, on Saturday, February 22nd, 2020. And they called to say, this body that we found matches a general description of a missing girl in Farmington. They conducted an autopsy, and that did confirm that it was Sasha. So the mystery of where she went, where she disappeared to, and where she was now unfortunately solved. She was deceased and found over 250 miles away from her home. The autopsy also helped them to officially declare her death a homicide from the gunshot wound to the back of her head. She also had blunt force trauma to her head. There was no definitive evidence of injury to her genital area, but they didn't elaborate on this publicly, at least. The sheriff's office said they're not going to release the results of the sexual assault exam kit. They wanted to protect her privacy and that of the family. Obviously, not wearing underwear at the time was concerning, but that's all we know. We just know there was no definitive evidence of injury. Don't know much beyond that. So the mystery of where Sasha was very sadly solved at this point. But the new mystery was, who would have killed this very well-liked, quiet, kind woman 250 miles away from her home, and why? Now, they couldn't determine if she was actually killed where she was found. There was no apparent evidence. There were some drag marks through the area that she was found, but they didn't find any shell casings there. They weren't able to determine if she was actually killed there in the woods in Flagstaff, or if she was killed somewhere else and then her body was put there. They tested the duct tape that was around her hands and wrists, and there was no human DNA detected. Analysts also weren't able to reveal any fingerprints from the duct tape, so they had nothing to compare to run through CODIS. And while, again, like I said before, Mennonites there's a wide range of rules about how they feel about technology. Some have very strict restrictions on televisions, computers, cars, cell phones. Others don't have such strong restrictions. Joe Springer is a curator of the Mennonite Historical Library. And he said that technology use varies very widely, not just between groups, but sometimes even between families within the same community. So Sasha was a more conservative Mennonite, but she had a car, obviously, that she drove, and she also had a cell phone, and she had that cell phone with her the night she disappeared. So this was the best lead that investigators had, and they was to go and look at her cell phone records. And her cell phone pinged off of two different cell towers that evening in January that she went missing. And once they got into these records, and as I made very clear on the last episode, I'm no expert on cell phone towers and how they work. Although at this point I should be. We're on episode 91. Like, what am I doing? I should take a class or something and learn about it. But do they even have classes on that? I guess that's like a CSI class. Okay. So this is what hooked me into this story because there's no fingerprints. There's no DNA. There's no evidence that she was murdered in Flagstaff. And if she wasn't murdered in Flagstaff, well, there's a whole lot of space in between her home and Flagstaff where she could have been. That would be impossible to like narrow down. So where are you going to go? Like, where are you going to start as an investigator on this case? They start with the phones, like I just said. Uh, and only one other phone had communicated with those same towers as Sasha's phone at the same time that night that she went missing. That is, to me, I was like, oh, okay, well, done. Let's wrap this up. This case is solved. Of course, that's not true. You need more than that, but that's a great place to start. And that is exactly where investigators started. They figured out who the other phone belongs to, and it belonged to a man, a 21-year-old man named Mark Gooch. I'm sorry. It's really that last name just, it reminds me of something inappropriate that I won't say. I'm sure you can look it up. I'm just going to refer to him as Mark and not say his last name anymore because I can't handle it. So Mark, he was a 21-year-old airman stationed at Luke Air Force Base in Phoenix, Arizona. So who the hell is this Mark Gooch? Okay, I had to say it one more time. Well, they were determined to find out. So they did some digging. Investigators did some digging and gathered a little bit of information about Mark, who was raised also in a Mennonite community, but in Wisconsin. He grew up working on his family's dairy farm, which is so perfect because if you don't know anything about Wisconsin, you probably know that they make a lot of cheese there. I mean, like cheeseheads is what they call people who live in Wisconsin. I don't know if that's like a very well-known thing or just because I grew up in Chicago, that was a well-known thing. But cheese is a big thing. Dairy is a big thing in Wisconsin. So the fact that he grew up working on a dairy farm in Wisconsin is perfect. He apparently only went to school through the 8th grade. Again, here's another little thing that doesn't really make sense to me because he joined the U.S. Air Force. I was under the impression you had to complete high school. I could be wrong. His parents were members of the church, but Mark chose not to be baptized as a Mennonite. And despite his parents' disapproval, he joined the Air Force at the age of 18. He was known as saying that he joined the military because it allowed him to leave a life that was difficult, sheltered, and restricted. But Mark's father, Jim, says that his son left the Mennonite faith and joined the military because he lacked a converted heart. I don't understand what that means. His heart wasn't in it, is how I take that, or he lacked a heart that wanted to convert to being Mennonite. Either way, a research associate at the Young Center for Anabaptist and something else studies that I can't pronounce is quoted as saying what he did as far as joining the military is unusual. Plain Mennonites, and that's what they're called, plain Mennonites, is actually like part of, I'm not just saying like, I'm not calling them plain people. That is part of the title. Plain Mennonites take very seriously the teaching that Jesus gave about not to resist evil, but to turn the other cheek and not to use violence. So this research associate says, I would interpret Mark's going to the military as very much a statement of defiance against the community that he grew up in, which it seems fitting to me. That seems, as I was describing what Mennonites are earlier, they don't condone violence of any kind. They don't condone the military. So yeah, that seems like a pretty big act of defiance to say, not only am I not going to be baptized in the Mennonite church, but I'm going to join the military. He was in the Air Force, and he worked in equipment maintenance at the Phoenix area Air Base, where he was stationed in October of 2019. He also has a big family. It was really hard to find information on his family. I know that he has at least two brothers, Samuel and Jacob. I believe there are more members of his family, but there's very little about them out in the press. So Sam, one of Mark's brothers, said that the family left a Mennonite church in Wisconsin around 2015. I don't know where they went. I don't know what that means, but I took it that the family kind of went their separate ways. So Mark went into the Air Force. Jacob was a state trooper in Virginia. So everybody kind of went their separate ways, but the siblings apparently stayed in touch. And police were interested to see how they stayed in touch. So, not probably in the beginning of this investigation into Mark, but at a certain point, they did retrieve text messages between Jacob and Mark and Samuel. And Jacob was joking about how he was a state trooper. He pulled somebody over, a Mennonite. He pulled a Mennonite over and gave them a ticket. And in the text message, he joked about how he coughed on the driver to spread corona to the Mennonite wedding that they were going to. And then he put LOL at the end, which is so gross. Um, and then the text messages went on. I don't have the exact verbiage, but Samuel and Mark apparently were like egging him on, like, yeah, good job, bro. It's gross. But apparently that is just a small part of kind of what a not great person Jacob is, because that text conversation is actually part of an internal investigation into Jacob, who was placed on administrative leave around this same time. Separate criminal investigation, though, has nothing to do with what's going on with Mark and Sasha. The authorities actually don't have any indication that Mark and Sasha knew each other at all. There's everything they went through in their histories. There was nothing that showed that they ever knew each other. I mean, Sasha grew up in Texas, moved to New Mexico. Mark grew up in Wisconsin, moved to Arizona. Yes, they were both Mennonites and both from large families, but that was the only link, except for what this article that I found called a weird coincidence. It seems like I'll leave it at that for now. A weird coincidence. One of the elder Gooch brothers attended Bible school with Sasha in her hometown in Texas several years before this all happened. So I don't know, mid 2010s about, and had dinner at the Krause home, at Sasha's family home. I could find nothing more on this. I don't know what the context was. I mean, aside from that, he was going to Bible school, but like, why was he going to Bible school in Texas? And why would he have dinner at Sasha's home? And why was this not looked into more? Because that seems like I mean, we're talking about two people from two very, very different parts of the country who who had no connection whatsoever. But then, oh, coincidentally, a brother went to tech. Like, it just seems a little bit weird to me. I feel like there's got to be more there, but I searched high and low and I could find nothing else. So take it for what you will. So, what authorities came to decide that they're, they were kind of putting together this case and what they believed happened. And there's a big, let me be clear, there is a bit of a big leap between, in my head at least, between authorities, investigators, detectives, whoever, realizing, okay, Sasha's phone pinged off of these two towers, and there's only one other person whose phone pinged off of these towers at this same time on this same day, and that's Mark. That is weird. That is definitely something to look into. But how they got from that to what I'm about to tell you is, at least initially, is confusing to me. So they believe that Mark left his dorm room at Luke Air Force Base in Phoenix, Glendale, Arizona, where he was stationed, and that he drove over 400 miles to northwestern New Mexico. And due to his general just disdain for Mennonites, that he kidnapped Sasha and fatally shot her and took her to Flagstaff. I mean, I have so many questions at this point. So many questions at this point. So and I wish I had a map. Maybe I'll try and do this and put it on social media. But if you are not familiar with this area, look at a map. He's in Phoenix, which is basically dead smack in the middle of Arizona. And he drives all the way over to the northwest corner of New Mexico to kidnap a woman that he doesn't know. I mean, like, literally has no idea who she is, doesn't know what he's looking for, but he drives there and kidnaps her and either kills her there or then drives back to Arizona, not back down to the middle to Phoenix, but to the northern part to Flagstaff, and leaves her body there, and then drives back down to Phoenix because he was he apparently left the base and was back at the base within 24 hours. They obviously have a lot of surveillance happening at the base. So they bring him in for questioning. I don't know how they got there, but they bring him in for questioning. And he did admit to being in Farmington, New Mexico on January 18th, the same day that Sasha disappeared. He said he had a lot of free time that day to take a long drive. So he left his Air Force base early that Saturday morning and drove north through the snowy mountains in Flagstaff and across the Navajo reservation. He stopped to grab food and then later got gas in Farmington, New Mexico. And smart on him, it was very smart of him to mention that because obviously they would have found that out. That's, I just I just kicked over my microphone with my hand trying to itch my arm. Apologies for that. Um, so he at least had the wherewithal to say, yes, I left my base. I went here. I went here. I got gas in Farmington. He claimed that he was visiting a Mennonite church located on the outskirts of town, marked by the words lamp plus sign light, which were spelled out on white rocks on a nearby mesa, which is the publishing ministry where Sasha worked. So he's in the area. He said he wanted to attend a service at the church because he was missing the fellowship of the Mennonite community, which sounds like absolute bullshit. Like, you left at 18, joined the military. Now suddenly on a random Saturday morning, you really are missing the fellowship of the Mennonite community. So you're going to drive to Farmington, New Mexico to find a Mennonite church? I mean, there are Mennonites in other places. I'd imagine there's a Mennonite community somewhere here in Arizona. Um, but he told police, he said, but I hadn't checked the schedule, like when services would be happening at the church. Um, and I wasn't there in time for a service. So I just decided to turn around, head back to the base so that I can meet my friend the following day on Sunday. I feel like there's so many problems with this story um, because it just doesn't make sense to me why you would drive to Farmington, New Mexico. Detectives also found some inconsistencies in his account of events. So they, at this point, are now gathering everything they can about him: his cell phone records, surveillance footage from the Air Force Base, receipts from gas stations and places where he said he stopped to get food, all of it. So cell phone records did place him near the church in Farmington for several hours, and the cell phone records also placed him in the forest outside of Flagstaff after midnight. Again, his cell phone was the only cell phone communicating with the same cell phone towers as Sasha's phone before hers dropped off the map. Surveillance footage shows Mark's car returning to the Air Force Base around 7 a.m., but he told them it was no later than 2 a.m. He woke up Saturday morning, did this drive, and was back at the Air Force Base before 2 a.m. But that's not what the cameras are saying. They also found a receipt that showed that Mark had his car detailed the day after authorities made it public that they found a body in the forest outside of Flagstaff. They also found indications that Mark was trying to cover up some of his activities, some of what he was doing on that Saturday in January. He deleted his location history on his phone, which, again, guys, deleting something on your phone doesn't mean it's gone. So just because you delete your location history doesn't mean it's not stored in the inner depths of your phone and the cloud, and probably so many other places that I am not knowledgeable enough about to say, but it just looks suspicious. Probably more so than just leaving it on there and trying to explain your way out of why you were at these locations. He also apparently asked a friend to hold a .22 caliber gun for him because he wasn't allowed to have it on the base. Maybe you're not. I mean, that could be true. Maybe you're not allowed to bring your own weapons into the Air Force Base. Why would you? There's plenty there. Weird though. However, there is no DNA evidence, there are no eyewitnesses, and there are no fingerprints to tie Mark in any way, shape, or form to Sasha, her disappearance, or her murder. They did, as they kept digging, find more disturbing text messages in Mark's phone, where they're alleging that he's talking about surveilling. Sorry, I don't know why that was hard for me to say. Surveilling Mennonites, just any Mennonites. Again, it all feels a little bit general to me. So for those of you who like a really, every fact is like gospel, it's like for sure 100% true and it all lines up and makes sense, then you must be hating this case, because I don't need that. I think it's interesting when a case has some holes and some unanswered questions. But this, even for me, was like, come on, how did we get from here to here and make these connections? But they did. So they found text messages about him allegedly surveilling random Mennonites. These messages were sent just several days before Sasha disappeared in mid-January 2020. He was texting his brother and said, "This morning's surveillance was boring. A bunch of old people without much to live for. Clearly not the people we grew up with. Sad to say, another disappointment." Okay. To me, those text messages, and I'm not on his side at all, but those text messages could be about anything. Like, how do we know that's about surveilling Mennonites? Perhaps there was other text messages, other information that the police didn't share, because this is all they shared. So I don't know where you're at this moment in this case that I'm explaining, but me, when I'm researching this and learning about it, in my head, I'm like, all very weird, super suspicious, and not enough to arrest him. But I'm not a detective, and I was wrong. Because on April 21st, using the cell phone, financial, surveillance footage, and records that they had gathered, they were able to obtain search warrants, and they served Mark with search warrants, and they arrested him at his Air Force base. The arresting documents say a gun was used in the crime, and they are also charging Mark with theft for supposedly taking Sasha's head covering and her underwear. Although, to my knowledge, these items were never found. So it's not like they found these items in Mark's dorm room or whatever. Now, this is the piece that does seal the deal for me. A state crime lab report showed the bullet taken from Sasha's skull was fired from a .22 caliber rifle that Mark owned and asked his friend to hold on to. So his friend was interviewed and told authorities, yeah, Mark asked me to store this .22 caliber rifle because he wasn't allowed to have it at the Air Force base. And apparently, Mark also asked his brother, Samuel, to fly from Wisconsin to Arizona to go get that gun from his friend for him. But before that could happen, this is really interesting. So the friend of Mark told the cops, yeah, I have the gun. He asked me to hold on to it. I have it. So they took it. Authorities took the weapon, replaced it with one that was like almost identical. You would never know it's different unless you were at Mark. And they waited for Mark's brother, Samuel, to come pick it up. And he did. And then they arrested him. And that's a whole nother case that we won't get into. He was not held for very long and he was let go and whatnot. But it all looked really poorly on Mark. That he asked a friend to hold this gun. Then he asked his brother to fly from Wisconsin to Arizona. And his brother did. I mean, I love Jenna. But if she said, can you fly across the country to go grab a gun of mine? I'd be like, well, I don't know. Maybe I would do it. I might. So authorities have the gun. The bullet matches the gun. To me, that's it. All the cell phone records and stuff, yeah, that just helps build the case, but I can't imagine that would have been enough if they didn't have that matching bullet. So now we're going to trial. Sasha's parents chose not to attend, they chose not to attend the sentencing hearing. I think they did. I actually don't think they attended any of it. But I could be misspeaking there. But they definitely did not attend the sentencing hearing. But they did send a heartfelt letter to the judge. And I will read a little bit from that after we talk about the trial for a minute. So, Mark's attorney, Bruce Griffin, he said that because the prosecution's entire case, I should say this first, is kind of, you need a motive. You don't need one, but you want one when you're going before a jury. And so the prosecution's case to present in front of the jury was that Mark hated Mennonites. He had this like deep-seated hatred for this religious community, and it didn't matter who was part of it. Due to his bad experiences as a child, this was what they were saying. This is why he killed her. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He hated Mennonites. There we go. But Mark's attorney was saying that any connection that Mark had with the Mennonite community or hatred towards them, or conversations he had, like with his brothers, those really heinous text conversations that he had, not great, but it's not evidence of a homicidal ill will. playing devil's advocate, I can't disagree with that. Just because you don't like a group of people or you are exchanging text messages with your siblings talking negatively. I mean, it was a little more than talk. I think it was a little more than talking negatively, but talking negatively about a group of people, it doesn't mean that you necessarily want to or are going to kill them. Also, there's a lot of other evidence. So I kind of feel like unnecessary to say that. So something that was really big during Mark's trial was when jurors were able to listen to a detailed testimony from a cell phone data expert named Sev Dishman. He's actually also a retired Army Sergeant Major and a cell phone data expert. And he presented really detailed explanations that, I mean, again, like I said, the bullet thing for me, that like if I'm a juror, done. Of course, somebody else could have used his gun. There were no fingerprints, whatnot. But that's to me, that's pretty damning. But apparently, this testimony really seemed to sway the jury, not in Mark's favor. So he presented detailed explanations of cell phone data types. He also talked about the concentration of cell sites, the accuracy of the location data. Mark's attorney pointed out that the evidence doesn't directly place Mark at the church compound or at the forest. And it certainly can't tell us what happened, just because Mark was at this church hours away from where he's stationed in a random place doesn't mean he did anything wrong. And that's true. That is, true. But the Sev Dishman testified that that Mark's cell phone was within a half mile of the church and about 1.3 miles from where Sasha's body was found, based on its communication with cell towers. Aside from the fact that it was the only device to connect to the same cell sites before Sasha's phone kind of went off the map. And the cell phone records actually mapped out Mark's path on that Saturday, January 18th. That showed when he left the airbase, he traveled past Flagstaff Mountains. He crossed the Navajo reservation, just like he said. That all lined up. And the receipts confirmed where he stopped for food and where he stopped for gas in Farmington. There were photos on his phone, a few photos that showed locations along Interstate 17, which runs between Phoenix and Flagstaff. That's how you get up to Flagstaff from Phoenix. Really beautiful drive. And these records also indicated that his phone was near the Mennonite church in Farmington for a couple of hours and then took a detour into the forest outside of Flagstaff after midnight. And then, of course, we saw him on surveillance returning to the base around 7 a.m., even though he said 2 a.m. He was clearly lying about that. Now, the cell phone expert did note that there are gaps in the cell phone data due to the limited number of cell phone towers on the Navajo Nation land and near Sunset Crater National Monument, where Sasha's body was found. More precise location data would have required actual GPS to have been enabled, and apparently it was not. But Mark and Sasha both had AT&T, and AT&T apparently relies on assisted GPS. So that's harder to acquire, perhaps. GPS has to be turned on, and then you have to go through AT&T. It's apparently a whole thing. So they couldn't pinpoint it like super, super specifically. But again, he is right there at the church. He's in the woods after midnight. He lied about when he got back to the base. This is all looking really bad for him. And then also his location history was deleted. There was also recorded jail conversation because he was arrested and held on I saw $1 million, I saw $2 million bond. He never got out. He was arrested in jail and didn't get out. So they had a recorded jail conversation between Mark and his brother Samuel, where Mark says, "Is it possible for you to remotely wipe my cell phone and SD cards? Also, I'd love you to cancel all these automatic payments I have set up and empty one of my bank accounts." mm, if you're in jail and you're asking somebody to remotely wipe your cell phone, maybe don't do that because I don't even know if that, I mean, I guess if you're a hacker, that's possible. I'm not sure it's possible to remotely wipe someone else's SD card or SIM card. Is it called a SIM card anymore? That's weird. That was like a core memory of being in Greece and needing to get SIM cards. Anyways, um, so all of these things that are presented during the trial, the prosecution is presenting is not working in Mark's favor. And and he was convicted by the jury. One count each of first degree murder and kidnapping. I guess theft of her underwear or head covering was not, ended up not being part of this. But first degree murder and kidnapping in the death of Sasha Krause. He was convicted by a jury in October. And and when it came to his sentencing, he apparently expressed no emotion while he was sitting in front of the judge. He did briefly address the court, Mark. He said, "Firstly, I'd like to express my sincere condolences to the deceased, that's hard to say, the deceased family, to Sasha's family. Jesus. And also, I'd like to express my thankfulness for the love and support from my own family in this difficult situation." Difficult situation, not how I describe it. Um, so Sasha's parents, remember, did not attend the sentencing hearing, but they did send a letter to the Coconino County Superior Court judge. They wanted the judge to see Sasha as more than just a victim in this case. They wanted the judge to see Sasha as a person. And so they wrote this letter where they described Sasha as a loving sister. She was eager to learn. She was kind. She was determined. They wrote, quote, "As she grew older, Sasha was more than our daughter. She was our friend. I didn't only teach her, she taught me, and I'm so thankful." Along with this letter, the family sent photos of Sasha, photos of her reading to children in Sunday school, spending time with her family, enjoying the snow in Colorado on a trip, all so that the judge could see her as more than just a victim. They also expressed in this letter their struggle to understand why their daughter was kidnapped and murdered, but they said they trust it was part of a greater plan. They wrote, quote, "God will use her death for his glory, and I'm convinced he has eternal purposes for Sasha that we can only guess about from here." Which, I tell you, I'm not a religious person, but moments like this, I would imagine having that faith and truly believing that there's a greater reason for this. And it's not just arbitrary and fucking terrible. I think that that's really nice. I don't have that. I don't believe that. And I think that's sad. I think it would be better if I did. I wish I did. I wish I did. The prosecuting attorney with the Coconino County Attorney's Office read part of a poem that Sasha wrote when she was 19, and it was very strangely titled, "If I Die Young." And the second stanza said, "If I die young, think not the hours wasted I spent preparing for some future day. My God is not unrighteous to forget it." And I am no poet, so that's slightly lost on me, the meaning behind it, but I think it is interesting that she wrote a poem with that title and then it was read at her trial, her murder trial. So, um, the judge said that the case was one of the most, truly the most senseless case I have ever presided over. And she sentenced Mark to prison for the rest of his natural life with no possibility of parole. Mark's attorney said he was disappointed that Mark won't have a chance at life outside of prison. He also struggled to understand a motive because he said that not only was Mark described by family and friends as being hardworking, respectful, inquisitive, and generally kind, but that's what his attorney experienced with him. That he was kind. He was a kind, respectful man with no criminal history. So it quite shocking, quite out of left field for Mark. Um, and that is it. Mark's parents declined to comment after the sentencing hearing, other than to say that they were praying for Sasha's family. And that's that. That's our case for today. He is still in prison and presumably will be for the rest of his life. This is not this case just I believe so it was 2020 when she was killed. 2020 when he was arrested. I think I read that it was 2 years after she went missing that he was finally sentenced. So this was just in 2022. So he has a long, long time. And he's only, what, 22 years old, 23 years old. So he is unfortunately, well, or fortunately, I guess. I'm sorry. I misspoke. Fortunately, he has a long life in prison. And I mean, and I do believe, when I was doing this, I was kind of like, did he do this? I, I mean, he did. I believe he did. I would be so curious to know why. Like, it's just it's really hard for me to wrap my head around that he's on an Air Force base in Arizona and just randomly decides one day to drive to Farmington, New Mexico. And he just happened to see Sasha walking either from her car into the church or from the church out to her car and grabbed her and killed her. I mean, it blows my mind. I guess it shouldn't. At this point, after 90 of these episodes that are all heinous and horrible, and half of them don't have either a conclusion or a motive, this shouldn't shock me, but it does. And I guess I'm glad that it still does. I don't want to get to the point where this is just like common happenstance. Oh, yeah. Well, whatever. It doesn't need a motive. No, I find it shocking. So, that's our case. That's it. And my thoughts are with Sasha's family. I can't even imagine. And I don't know. I'd be so interested. What do you guys think? Like, would it be better if they knew if Mark spoke at the trial and offered a motive, offered a reason for this? You know, there's so many possibilities of what could have happened, how this could have gone down, why it happened. Um, But would that make it any better? Because they still lost their daughter in a horrific way, and she's still gone. So maybe it wouldn't. I don't know. I've never known someone who was murdered, um, so I'm not sure. But I know that some of our listeners do and have known people who have been murdered, which, whew, crazy. So let me know your thoughts on that, and let me know your thoughts on everything and anything else. I am going to not ramble on because who the hell listens to the people don't even like listening to me ramble at the beginning of episodes. After an hour long episode, I'm guessing no one is listening to the rambling at the end. So, um, I will say again, if you don't listen to the bonus episodes, that's generally where I respond to emails, voicemails, text messages, stuff like that. So I did mention, and I just want to say again, thank you, Gabriel, and thank you, Delaney, for sending emails. I talked about those on yesterday's bonus. And thank you to everyone else for your Instagram messages. Thank you to my lovely, beautiful, wonderful patrons. And don't forget to tell me what day next week you think you would like to do a Zoom where we can hang out for half hour, 45 minutes and chit chat. and we will get that planned. And then we're gonna do another in-person thing, but I'm gonna now wait until it's warmer. Before I was waiting until it was cooler, so we could like sit outside and wear a jacket and it wouldn't be so hot. Now it's too cold. So now I'm gonna wait until it's a little bit warmer. And we're gonna do it at St. Philip's Plaza at River and Campbell because they have great outdoor seating there. So I don't know when that's gonna happen. It'll probably be myself and Mark. Maybe my friend Jackie will come. But I would love, love, love for Laura and Sandra, who came last time, to come again, and for anyone else to come, and we can all hang out. And with that, I will now go through the whole rigmarole of begging you to please go leave a review on Apple. It helps so much. And that was just reiterated to me the other day by my new wonderful ad sales man. And it really does help. So, and consistent reviews help. So please, even if it's just like a thumbs up or I can't stand this woman's voice or her face irritates me. I don't care. Anything you want to say. I like to know your honest opinion, and it really does help the show, kind of like boost the show up on Apple. And leave a comment on Spotify because I'm finding them very entertaining. A little bit hurtful, but entertaining. And if you want to join the Zoom Patreon thing, then head on over to Patreon. And that's it. Okay, I said I wasn't going to ramble, and I did anyways. I love you guys. I am sweating next to this radiator, so I'm going to go change my clothes and make some dinner and feed the dogs. And would you guys ever nah, never mind. I'm not even going to get into it. I'm just going to say goodbye. Okay, that's it. Love you guys. Bye.
Death by Southwest is hosted by Jenna Schneider and Margot Carmichael.
Executive produced by Margot Carmichael.
Produced by Jenna Schneider.
Audio editing and sound design by Margot Carmichael.
Music by Soundstripe.
And a special thanks to Edward R. Murrow for letting us borrow his famous sign-off phrase, "Good night and good luck."